Dual representation. Can a realtor work with both a buyer and seller effectively? Does it harm either party? Is it totally okay in the industry? We're going to talk about that and more in today's episode of The Den.
The Den, powered by the Lyons Group, a show dedicated to exploring hot topics in real estate, local happenings, and industry trends. We're a small team of professionals approaching $400 million in sales and nearly 2,000 local transactions. You're listening to time-tested experts and industry leaders. Here's a refreshing look at real estate happenings and more. Welcome to The Den.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Den. Today, we're going to be talking about dual representation, some of the facets of that, the ins and outs, things to be aware of. But before we get to that, I'm going to introduce my co-hosts, my partners, my friends, the fellow members of the Lyons Group. To my left, Paul, hand me the rockberry. Melissa, let's go. Glasgow. Aspen, the Ninja Groen. And Shannon, the boss. Martin Martinez. My name is Ben Lyons, and I'm your host of The Den with the Lyons Group, top brokers taking on tough questions. And these are tough questions. These are tough, complicated concepts. And we're going to try to shed some light on a topic that has reared its head over the years and sometimes has been problematic. Other times it hasn't been as much, but it seems to come and ebb and flow over the years with this concept of dual representation. And I wanted to talk about that today so we could kind of clear the air, maybe get some thoughts together on whether that is a bad thing or not. As realtors, do you practice dual representation? How does it affect the consumer? How do we navigate those waters when we're working with both a buyer and seller? So those are the things we want to talk about today. I mean, I guess I'll kick off the conversation. 20 plus years in the business. I've been many times over the years on both sides of the transaction. Obviously, I have a written agreement with the seller as a listing contract, and then I may find a buyer that's interested in the property. And how do I navigate those waters? Well, in the past, there used to be a thing, and there still is a thing, it's just not very popular, called agency, where you signed an agreement with the seller in an agent capacity. And when you're in an agency agreement, you owe fiduciary duties. And fiduciary duties include obedience. It includes loyalty, confidentiality, some of these things that an attorney would owe a client, right? Or an accountant would owe a client, a fiduciary responsibility. Well, over the years, we've moved away from that in the real estate arena. We've moved to more transaction brokers. And transaction brokers actually encompass a couple of the fiduciary duties on the outline in the sense of disclosure of any adverse material fact and obedience, lawful obedience. So if your client gives you a request that's within the parameters and it's lawful, then you need to be respectful of that request. So some of those have been encapsulated. But as a transaction broker, I do not owe fiduciary duties to either party involved, even if I have a listing agreement with the seller. I have a listing agreement as a licensed transaction broker in most situations. And this is me talking, Ben Lyons as a realtor. Other realtors may do it a different way. So the way I approach that is when I have a seller and I have a buyer that may be interested in the property, my first and foremost concern is to establish a parameter where both parties can negotiate and hopefully come to terms on a transaction that's fair and unencumbered. And the second priority I have, which is equally as important, is that I do not marginalize either party's ability to negotiate. In other words, I take a personal stance on saying, I'm not going to tell the buyer their motivations to sell. I'm not going to disclose to the seller what the buyers may be willing to pay, or they may have pressure on why they need to buy quickly or whatever else. Those are for them. I have to personally discern what may compromise their ability to negotiate and allow a fair and free negotiation to happen. If they come to terms, wonderful. If they don't, that's okay. Now, that's me. That's how I've done business. I've been very successful at it over the years, but I want to get my fellow members of the Lyons Group their thoughts on how to navigate dual representation. Is it uncomfortable? Is it unfair? Shannon, what are your thoughts on that? You've been a broker for over 20 years as well. And we've seen the wave of agency and then non-agency and then transaction broker. And remember, it used to be so convoluted in our contracts.
Yeah.
Still confusing concept, but we want to shed some light on it. What are your thoughts?
And we discussed this a little bit. Melissa was saying she was a little uncomfortable. I agree with that. When I first started, I can remember if somebody would call on maybe one of my listings, I was more than happy to give them information, but I always say, I can find somebody in my office to help you with that. I always kind of wanted that stand back and let somebody else take the other side. Over the years, I think I've become more comfortable with it. I guess maybe because I just understand now that there's a way, as you said, there's a way to negotiate for people. There's a way to discuss them both and give them good information without necessarily giving anything out from the other side, that maybe would compromise somebody. So I don't know that you could say it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. I think it's a situational thing. It also depends on the customer. Individual customers sometimes just don't have any confidence in using a seller's broker when they're a buyer. Paul and I had this a while back. I had shown somebody a listing of his and I just kept saying, I just don't understand. I knew he was going to write an offer and he did. He went to another agent and I kept saying, I don't know what I did wrong. Paul did find out later, the buyer said he was never going to use the listing agent. He just wanted to look at the house and if that worked, he'd go find his own agent. So some people are just set on having their own representation. I think it's really dependent on what the customer wants and what their comfort level is. Sometimes it can be very beneficial.
Yeah.
Having only one broker involved,
Yeah.
you don't have another person. I don't want to say getting in the way, but sometimes we as brokers can get in the way of things. And when you only have one broker, sometimes you can get things done a little bit easier,
Have you ever played what's the game where you all whisper something and then they whisper and then they whisper? And by the time it gets all the way back, it's like, I'm hungry for spaghetti, and it gets all the way back. It's like, I want lemonade. Yeah. So that's the same thing that happens in real estate. I mean, seller will convey to me something. I think I have the essence of that. I convey it to the other realtor. The other realtor conveys it to the buyer, and somewhere along the line, it may get lost in translation. Yeah. And so that can be a problem. That does bring out a benefit of being the sole agent in a transaction. Aspen, what are your thoughts in that regard?
I like dual representation, but I don't think it's necessarily for everybody or every situation. I think sometimes there needs to be multiple people involved, and I do a decent bit of commercial, so I'm used to working with lawyers quite a bit, and confidentiality and stuff is not really something I've ever considered to be an issue for me. And also, if someone asks me something and I can't tell them, I have no problem saying, I'm sorry, I can't share that with you. So I think if you're not comfortable saying, I can't give you that information, and maybe even getting some pushback on it, then maybe it's not for you. But I also think if I'm the listing broker and I'm showing somebody a home and they want to write an offer, I'm going to thoroughly explain what dual representation is, and then saying, if you're not comfortable with that, I can find you somebody else to work with, or you can find your own person to work with. So I think just full disclosure and consent to the, arrangement is the first and foremost most important thing. But I think it can make things go a lot smoother. I think it can be a really good thing, but I've also seen the opposite, where the realtor was kind of doing it for their own gain. So working with someone that you trust and is reputable, I think is really important.
Yeah. And transparent right up front. I mean, people can sense, I use the car lot analogy a lot, in the sense that you go to a used car lot, and you say used car, nothing against used car lots or car salesmen at all. Great people, have some great friends that are in car sales, but you know the difference between a professional, right? A professional who's there to help you, assist you, be transparent about the process, and someone that's coming over to schmooze you, right? And consumers and clients can feel that a mile away. I don't know why people even are over on this side of the spectrum, right? Because all you got to do is be a professional. And it doesn't matter what business you're in. If you're transparent right up front and professional all the way through the process, you should be good. Melissa, expand upon some thoughts there. I know you're not overly comfortable with it, but what are your thoughts? I mean, what gives you heartburn about it?
So, in our broker duties, we have the duty to disclose if we know any adverse material facts or anything like that. If one party has access to more information than the other, that could put, the way I see it, I don't want to be put in a situation where it gets litigious because somebody feels like I didn't disclose something. Sure. I should have told them that. I should have told them there was that leak, but they didn't want, you know what I mean? To me, that's a part where it gets kind of gray for me. I started my career working on buyer side only, and half of it, I'm now, working both sides of it. So I've only had the opportunity to do it once, and it was fabulous. It went really, really well. But it still just gives me a little bit of heartburn because I don't want to put anybody in a situation where they feel like they're being either left out or taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So that's where I stand.
Understood. And I think that parlays off of what Shannon said originally. Originally, she just wasn't comfortable with it. But over the years, as you become more of a conduit and a little bit more of a referee versus being in the fray, it becomes a little bit easier. So, Paul, I know you've done a ton of properties on both sides, representing buyer and seller. What are your thoughts? I mean, what are the biggest heartburns that you've run into, and what are your concerns, or what are the advantages too?
Well, that's a lot.
I know it's a lot. I mean, you got a big head. I got to fill it,
bro.
Yeah.
I would say that I like doing both sides of a transaction. You mentioned broker duties. I was going to bring that up. If you follow broker duties to the letter, there's no ability to cross over the line. If you are a transaction broker, and what that really means is, and I was going to bring up, if you went to me first, the difference between agency and transaction broker. Agency, pretty much, you give the realtor the parameters to get a deal in, okay? And you don't have any say in the decisions. You just bring a deal to your customer. In a transaction broker, you give them all the decision making. You just bring all the options, all the information that you have, and bring it to them. So in a dual representation, you play that role even more, and you just say, here's what they wanted to ask, and the other side answers it, and you bring it back over to them. And if you do that, then you're allowing them to make their own decisions. I understand, like, when you get into inspections and you know there's things are wrong, but they are the ones that are asking for repairs, or they are the ones that are concerned about this but not concerned about that. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to be concerned. So like you were saying, we're not in the mix. We're not a party to the contract. So if they're not concerned with it, we can't be either. You know, once it falls apart, then we have some other liabilities or duties to the other party. But when you're in the deal, I think just being the information giver, you've always said to me, be the source of the source, not the source of information. So we're just kind of conveying what the other side wants. When you're not very experienced at doing this, it can be overwhelming, and you just show your cards and be like, do you like it? Do you like it? And then try to make a deal happen. And you're so worried that the deal's going to happen that when they come at odds, an inexperienced realtor would be like trying to fix the problem and find a resolution, where a more experienced person would just be like, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Or here, maybe look at it from this angle. I think a lot of what we do is managing expectations and helping change or shift perspectives.
Yeah.
Like, look, you have these problems, you have this, everyone's trying to get to the common goal here, but how can you look at this a little bit different? How can you see this from a different angle? And I think that's really what is a critical and beneficial a point to be in dual representation, is you can bring that perspective to both sides and say, we have options here. There are options, and there may be impasses. There may be an impasse where you just can't get through, and that's okay. You've established the rules. You've helped a fair play. And sometimes in negotiations, a buyer will get, better negotiation standpoint than a seller. It just happens, or a seller, or vice versa. But you've established a fair game.
I just thought of one of the better advantages of representing both sides. You understand how to present an objection because you know how that other side could react to.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I was actually going to say a little something about that. Sometimes people feel like if you're representing both sides, you can't advocate for one side or the other. But sometimes we're a better advocate, because if I've gone over this home inspection and I can see what their real concerns are, and we've put that together, as opposed to just receiving it in an email from the other side, now I can come to the seller and say, this was super concerning because, their 3-year-old has, asthma issues or whatever it is, maybe I can. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to take it, or it doesn't mean that the seller has to agree with that. But maybe I can advocate for my customer a little bit more and even help the seller, because now they can understand more where that's coming from. So sometimes we can be better advocates by knowing everybody's motivations and things. I know that we don't always want to give those out, but sometimes we can help make their case better when we've had intimate contact with them, when we have firsthand contact, as opposed to just an email that was sent to us.
And especially when you know your client and how they communicate. You have people that are more engineer minded. Like, they're like, give me the report, give me the thing.
That's
I want to read through
what I was thinking about.
I want to read through it. Don't talk to me. And then, then I'll absorb it and I'll get back with you. And then you have people that are more emotional. And so you've got to appeal to their emotions to some degree. Listen, I know this looks like a long list.
Right.
But you have to understand, if you were in this position as a buyer, this is why they would have these concerns. And they have a child that,
Right.
is susceptible to asthma or whatever. So the mold is a big issue for them. So you can shed some light on the issue. And ultimately, if they come to terms on it, they come to terms. If they don't, they don't.
And if they give permission to disclose that.
Yes.
This is important to me because
Yes.
let the seller know.
And you make a great point there, is that if it is sensitive information like that, I do always make a request from the buyer or seller. Hey, is it okay if I share this part with the other side? Now, you're not technically bound by confidentiality with a transaction as a transaction, but you can share anything you want, but it is a slippery slope. And that's where I say, me personally, I practice being very guarded with not marginalizing someone's ability to negotiate, taking those steps. Let me take a quick minute and just read through. This is the first page of our broker duties. These are duties that we sign up for, whether we're working with buyer or seller. The first set of duties, and I'm not going to read through all this. I'm just going to give a quick once over. But the first set is what we owe everybody in this transaction, whether we're working with buyer or seller, and to the other realtor, if another realtor is involved. We owe honesty and reasonable care and ethical and professional conduct. As a transaction broker, you owe those duties. You also owe compliance with local, state, and federal fair housing and anti-discrimination laws. You also owe performance of any and all written agreements with any of the parties involved. You also are required to give a written disclosure of any potential conflict of interest. If I am looking at a home that I personally want to purchase, I need to disclose to that seller right away that as a realtor, I'm interested in purchasing your property. And you have to have written disclosure of any adverse material facts actually known about the property that may influence a buyer's decision to purchase or a seller's decision to accept. Okay. So we have basic duties that we owe as a transaction broker to all parties involved. In addition, we have other duties. Those include acknowledgement by the buyer that there may be matters related outside their scope of expertise. Aspen does a lot of commercial properties. She's very comfortable with that. There may be other realtors that aren't comfortable doing commercial, and they better disclose, hey, I've only done a couple commercial deals. We may want to get another set of eyes on this, or something very specific like a business for sale versus an actual piece of property. And so there are other things like prompt accounting for monies, maintenance of confidential information from a prior agreement that included fiduciary duties. So there's a whole list of duties that we owe to buyer and seller. So it's not just willy-nilly. I think that's what I want to impress on the people watching this episode, is that we just don't go out there and jump into dual representation and take it lightly. I mean, we are bound by a code of ethics. We also have broker duties that we are bound by, and we take those very seriously because that's what keeps us as professionals. Any more thoughts on dual representation, whether good, bad, ugly? Any incidences that you want to share that you've ran into where you may have saved the day or helped keep something together, or it could have been problematic?
I've only had good experiences, but I don't think it's anything like saved the day or anything. I try and be really proactive no matter what deal is going on. But they were just, I've never had a bad experience with it. Always really smooth and good. But I do think that real estate transactions can be a win-win. And I think most of the time they actually are. So I think if you're coming in with that mindset that the buyer's going to win, the seller's going to win, they're going to get the house they want, they're going to get a fair amount for their house, I think it makes it a lot easier versus if you're a seller or a buyer who really wants their realtor to fight for them and, get the best deal that they can and kind of wants you to act more as an agent rather than a transaction broker. I don't think that's necessarily the right thing for you then. Maybe you might want your own representation in that case, and you might want, even a lawyer to look over things. And I think one thing that I wanted to point out too was how you were saying like the leaky roof. We have to disclose that anyways. We have to disclose all adverse material facts, which I'm going to tell my seller from day one. So, and I'm with you, Ben. If you tell me something about your personal life or family life or your financial anything, unless it adversely affects you purchasing the home, you can't afford the loan or something, that's all confidential always. So even if we don't owe it. So I think we all operate on that same realm. So absolutely. Just working with somebody that you can really trust is really important.
Yep.
I was helping somebody buy a house here. They were selling their house in, I think it was Oregon, and they had dual agencies. So the same person had agency for the buyer and the seller. He came to me and said, we've got my house is under contract. Here's what I want to buy. So we go and we ask for that contract, and he gave the realtor kind of loose parameters. This gentleman went under contract for, I can't remember what it was, but it was tens of thousands of dollars under the list price. And the agent sold the furniture along with it.
Yeah.
And not all of the furniture, but there was some nice stuff that got sold. And we were trying to figure out what the heck was going on. So dual agency, if you don't have the right professional who's doing things correctly, you could be in a bad situation.
Well, and I think you just bring up a really good point, because Paul just said dual agency. Dual agency is different than dual representation. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is for a consumer to understand that dual representation is what we do on a regular basis. It's being a transaction broker on both sides. Dual agency is where you're owing fiduciary duties to both sides. Now, I have heartburn with that, because how can you owe duties? That's why attorneys can't, if it's a husband and wife that are getting divorced, they exclude themselves. Attorneys exclude themselves. Well, I've worked with her in the past, or I've worked with him in the past. I can't, so you can't cross that line of fiduciary duties. But the other thing is, it's really important when you're an agent, quote unquote, an agent for someone, you're in an agency capacity, you can enter them into a contract that they don't maybe not agree with, because as a seller or a buyer, you've given that agency over to them so they can sign on the dotted line. They can enter you to a contract. They can sell your furniture. Mm-hmm. I mean, it may be limited in scope, but it still gives them the power. You are liable for that agent's work, and they're liable if you don't give them the proper information. So there's a lot of liability that goes along with the agency. So I'm glad you made that point. Was everything successful? Did you work it out, or did you buy him some furniture?
Well, he bought himself some furniture.
Some beanbag chairs?
Yeah.
They're comfortable.
Those inflatable chairs, they work for a little bit.
And I just want to say, in Colorado, you cannot do dual agency.
So they've taken that out of the picture.
It's not even an option. Yep.
And good, and rightfully so.
Yeah. You can still work with someone as an agent, but then the other person you have as a customer rather than a client. Mm-hmm. So that person, basically, you're just handing them the paperwork and they have to do it themselves. So there's still the dual representation that we were talking about, like the facilitator, but no dual agency in Colorado, which is not a bad thing, I don't think.
No. Yeah. That seems logical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In an agency capacity, I can certainly understand. Well, that moves us on to the speed round. Before we get to that, Melissa, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, in our purchase agreements, it has a spot so everybody knows. It discloses if we are working dual representation, if the other realtor is within the same brokerage, anything like that. So both parties should always know who is representing them.
Yes.
It's in there.
The professional, transparent thing to do is make sure everyone is aware.
Yes.
Wonderful. On to the speed round. Final thoughts. Melissa, I'm going to kick it off with you.
Sure.
Is dual representation, not dual agency, is dual representation a good thing?
It can be if everybody involved is on board.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've changed our mind.
I'm
not against it, but it just, it's kind of, but yeah, if everybody's on board, but if one person isn't for it, then
not a good thing.
I'm not going to force anybody into it.
Yep. Aspen?
I think it can be a good thing. I think it can also be a really bad thing. So I think it really depends on the realtor and their ethics and if it's the right thing for everybody. Yeah. So can be a good thing, can be a bad thing.
Yeah. Understood. Shannon?
Yeah. I'm in agreement. It's just depending on the situation.
Yep. Can be good or bad. Mm-hmm. Paul? Yep. Check that off. I was just thinking about, we closed a deal a little while back that I was in the situation of dual representation, and we had a buyer that was very pushy and sweet lady, but very, I would say, passive aggressive. Mm-hmm. And we have a seller that was very much like, I'm going to take my time. I need to work through these things and whatnot. And I think in that instance, I was able to keep the deal together because I was being the punching bag for the person that was super passive aggressive and not allowing that to flow to the seller who gets very much reactionary on things. Yeah. And so in that instance, I saved the day. Mm-hmm. I would put a cape on and
pat yourself on the back.
Blue tights. What do you think of that, Paul? Skin tight? Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. Okay. Stop this. This conversation is going nowhere. Okay. On to my favorite part of the podcast, and that is the Lyons Pride. We take pride in our community as the members of the group, the Lyons Group. We go out in the community and we do great things in our community. We give back. We try to make our community and our profession a better place. And we like to honor those that do the same. And so we pick a person, an entity, an event, whatever it is, and highlight them. And welcome to the Lyons Pride. This week, Aspen is going to shed some light on the next Lyons Pride member.
Sure. I'm going to pick an entity, actually. Okay. Something that I think is just a gem in our community that I think we totally take advantage of, the Farmington Public Library.
Mm-hmm.
We have one of the best libraries. I mean, and the programs that they offer, whenever I would watch my niece in the summer and then I had my kids and I just wanted stuff to do, they have stuff all the time there, and they have like all ages too, from babies to teenagers. It is just such a good, safe space, and it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big reader, and I just think I'm a big advocate for reading. So they have also, my son is dyslexic, so they have stuff for him there as well to really help him. So they do crafting and yoga. I mean, the Farmington Public Library is something that I think we need to utilize more here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is an unsung, speaking of hero, an unsung hero in our community. That the building itself, the architect that designed that is fantastic. Yeah. They have inside in the concrete, they have like the different sun patterns and some of the things like that. But what a fantastic facility. Great choice. Mm-hmm. It really is a sleeper. Mm-hmm. I mean, right in the heart of town too. And it's a beautiful space. Great place for kids to learn. I remember the kids taking field trips to the library. And do they still have the Dewey Decimal?
Like how they organize
the
books?
They have computers now, but
card catalog.
Card catalog.
Oh, I was like, how they organize it? I'm pretty sure they still organize it the same way.
You're too young for the Dewey Decimal.
I'm like, I know what it is, but
that is a great point. And I just want to say, if you work at the library, or you were instrumental in helping the library function, or you were one of the founders that helped push that concept and really make it what it is today, we want to say we see you, we thank you, and the Lyons Group, we're super proud to have that library in town and to help our community be better. So fantastic. Thank you for that. Next episode, I think we're going to approach some of the big NAR changes. People have heard about the commission things and the settlement of the lawsuit and these other things. We want to shed some light on that. So we are still finding out information on how that's going to change the industry. The industry is going to change. That's okay. Things evolve, but we want to be able to come out and say, this is how it's going to change. This is the repercussions. This is the implications for you as buyers and sellers. And I think it's going to be a fantastic and interesting concept to talk about. So that's going to be on the next episode. Until then, thank you for listening to The Den, and we'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to The Den, powered by the Lyons Group. Hit the subscribe button to keep informed on real estate happenings. If you'd like to learn more about the Lyons Group, visit sjcbroker.com. Complex markets require complex strategies. The Lyons Group can give you a true advantage in any market. Whether you're buying or selling, residential or commercial, contact us directly at sjcbroker.com. We're time-tested experts with a client-first approach, and we'll see you next time in The Den.